This is going to be very short. I have a few slides to share an idea about a core European regulation and some ideas that I've been working with a think tank in Brussels called ERCST. If we can bring up the first slide, please. Yes, so this is based on a paper that we put out in January, which is very much focused on how we can increase the flexibility in European regulation about how we decarbonize transport. And this is very much focused on one particular regulation, the CO2 in vehicles regulations, that I think we all know is focused really quite narrowly, ultimately on electrification to the exclusion of other technologies. And it's a reflection on maybe what's missing from that. So I'm not going to read out all of this. I'm going to get quickly to some of the core diagrams. We have a limitation at the moment that the current regulation focuses very much on the tailpipe. And this is true for cars and heavy-duty vehicles. In terms of an industrial impact, this means that certain industries, if we were to lose scale in the European industry, it would have a knock-on effect on many other industries as well. The car and truck industries are kind of anchor industries in terms of demand for many other products to make the cars, and then, of course, to power them as well. And we increasingly see competitiveness concerns with, it's very clear that China has got a head start on electrification, and it's not clear that Europe can have a plan to be as competitive as China, and we need to reflect on that. Now, to be clear, we're talking about the vehicle regulation, which currently works something like this. Across the life of a car and its energy, starting with parts suppliers and ending up with the consumer, the current regulation for cars focuses entirely on the manufacturer and the vehicle as a product from that manufacturer. The manufacturer is the obligated party. You could argue actually it's the end customer that's the regulated party because it regulates what they can and cannot choose. But the current compliance scope is very limited, and ultimately from 2035, essentially your only real route is electrification. Theoretically, hydrogen is also allowed. I think that's not emerging as competitive, certainly in passenger cars. Maybe it could be in trucks. It's worth comparing the European regulation for vehicles there with other regulations that also regulate energy here. And so I've put on that slide 6 different regulations. You're happy to send the slides if you want them later. Emissions trading scheme has been in place for, 15 years now. It actually rates renewable fuels of any kind, biomass, as zero CO2. Emissions trading scheme for roads and buildings, which is just being introduced, somewhat controversially in some countries, also regards renewable fuels as zero CO2. The Renewable Energy Directive itself, that forces the blending of biofuels across Europe, recognizes fully, of course, the renewable fuels on a life cycle basis. Then we come to CO2 in cars and HDVs. It ignores all molecules, and it simply treats all molecules as if they are fossil molecules. It has no attempt to make any differentiation. But strangely, other comparable transport regulations, Fuel EU Maritime and Refuel EU Aviation, are very different. They use a life cycle basis for those, and in fact, it's the operators rather than the manufacturers of the vehicle that are the obligated party. I would argue that the outlier in regulation here is the car CO2 regulation. And I would say, frankly, if we were to start today and ask what is the best way to decarbonize road transport through regulation, we would not have that regulation. I'm old enough to remember when the car CO2 standard was called the fuel economy standards. It was about fuel economy and reducing the fuel usage. It has simply been taken to an extreme where you reduce the fuel usage to zero, whatever the fuel. That is not a CO2 standard. In terms of sustainable fuels, this is in particular around sustainable fuels, but not only about the fuels. We clearly need sustainable fuels in the future. We also see that there could be solutions which are hybrid in nature of technologies, as well as the hybrid in the vehicle, where this could actually reduce the number of batteries that we need, or the quantities of batteries that we need in Europe. In terms of availability, I've worked this subject for well over a decade, and what we'll typically hear is there's not enough biofuels. I would argue that that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say you don't need them for transport, people won't develop them for transport. But I think what we can see from some of the speakers today and others, there are many technologies to open up the supply of biofuels by going to new technologies and new feedstocks. This is actually a diagram, you won't read this diagram, but this is a graph of technology levels for the conversion of biomass into fuels. And at the top we have first generation biofuels, and they're all technology readiness level 9. And we've used those up mostly. We've already got most of the supply available. But there's a huge amount of biomass underneath there that needs more conversion. And those are not at technology level 9. If you're going to invest in those, you need to know there's long-term demand. If you're doing it for road transport, well, the regulation at the moment says your demand will go to 0 because the internal combustion engine is banned. So it takes away the investment case for a lot of the development of those. If we then look at aviation and maritime, we've just had a really good conversation which includes aviation. Aviation is struggling to make the at-scale commitment that would develop those technologies. And by the way, maritime is going into different places. So by taking away road transport demand, you take away the opportunity for most of those technologies to come forward. So I've said most of that already. Feedstock and logistics and technology readiness, we can make major improvements there. I'm not going to go through that. I'd really like to show another diagram. So the basic idea here is, why don't we open up the ways that we can comply with a regulation to have more technologies and more suppliers contribute to a lower carbon material? The core one there would be to recognize renewable fuel in the vehicle, in the use of the vehicle. But potentially, why not recognize in the regulation the use of a lower carbon steel or plastics, or for that matter, batteries? Because strangely, the electric vehicle mandate does not require the battery to be manufactured in a low carbon way. So there's a lot of things that you could do if you started from scratch. And of course, you could also have some influence from customer behavior. Compare this with the regulation for aviation, where actually the user has an obligation to choose, or a benefit to choose lower carbon energy. It just seems strange to construct this entirely around the vehicle product and mandating the manufacturer alone to make this as a contribution. So that's the potential extension that is possible. By doing this, you could actually make a business case to invest in making low carbon steel in Europe, because the car industry could pay a little more for the steel, for the plastics, for the battery, for the energy they use to make it. It just is an opportunity that is there that we can take. And so really this is all about broadening the scope from just the tailpipe and recognizing low carbon fuels and low carbon other products as well. My last graph is a piece of work that Konkawi did while I was there in Brussels. And again, you're not going to be able to read this, but essentially this graph is about how many batteries do we have in Europe from very little to generous supply across the bottom, and the way you have your fleet made up to maximize the CO2 reduction that's available from using those batteries. And the simple message is, and it's pretty obvious, if you don't have enough batteries, you should be making plug-in hybrids. You should be finding a way to get people to plug them in, and then when they can't plug them in, you supply them with a renewable fuel. And you may well do just as well as if you had a full electric vehicle fleet, but with far fewer batteries. In the wake of the failure of Northvolt and the British attempt, British Volt, and the domination that's emerging of batteries from US, China, and Korea, it would seem sensible to look for other options as well. This is really just my concluding remarks, that really we have got a very, very narrowly focused CO2 regulation, whereas in fact there are many things that we can do. And it's not only about giving car makers another option, it's about giving other industries an option to contribute as well. By doing that, giving them a reason to stay in Europe and to invest in low carbon technologies. It's an opportunity. I would just say let's not miss that opportunity. And I'll be happy to share this with Commission and other folks in regulation to help develop the idea. This was based on a paper that was published and is on the ERCST website, and I'd be happy to have a further discussion over a beer or a glass of wine. And my final thought is a quote from the Belgian Biofuels Association, which I think would be fitting for the moment, where they say, biofuels, you should drink the best and burn the rest. And with that thought, I leave you and wish you to have a good evening. Thank you.